They're all from all over the country.
Exciting.
Yeah.
All right, let's get started. I want to welcome you to Substance Use and Other Risk Factors for Gun Violence, Prevention, and the Intervention Strategies with Mark Sanders. This presentation was prepared for the Great Lakes PTTC under a cooperative agreement from the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, or SAMHSA. The opinions expressed in this webinar are the views of the speakers and do not reflect the official position of the Department of Health and Human Services. The PTTC believes that words matter and uses affirming language in all activities. We have a few housekeeping items for you. If you have technical issues, please individually message me, Rebecca Buller, or Jen Winslow in the chat section at the bottom of your screen, and we'll be happy to help you. If captions or live transcript would be helpful, please use your Zoom toolbar to enable by selecting live transcript. AI note taker options. Please do not activate an AI note taker application. We do not allow this for several reasons, and we'll ask you to disengage it. If you do not, we will have to remove you from the Zoom room. Questions for our speakers should be put into the Q&A option at the bottom of your screen. You will be redirected to a short survey after the webinar, and we'd appreciate it if you could fill it out. It takes about 3 minutes, and it helps us report to our funders and, most importantly, improve our offerings. And certificates of attendance will be sent out via email to all who attended this webinar in full, and it can take up to 2 weeks to receive those. If you would like to know more about what we're doing or information on upcoming events, please see our social media pages. And now I'd like to introduce our presenter. Mark Sanders is Illinois State Project Manager for the Great Lakes ATTC, MHTTC, and PTTC. He is an international speaker in the behavioral health field whose presentations have reached thousands throughout the United States, Europe, Canada, the Caribbean, and the British Virgin Islands. A partial list of clients include General Motors Corporation, Xerox Corporation, Northwestern University, and the United States Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marines. He's the author of 5 books and has had 2 stories published in the New York Times bestseller book series. Chicken Soup for the Soul. He has taught at the University of Chicago, Loyola University of Chicago, and the Illinois State University School of Social Work. Mark's 3 decades of experience as a direct service licensed clinical social worker provide the foundation for his presentations. And now I'll turn things over to Mark.
And thank you so much, Rebecca. And thank you, Jen. And thank you, Chris, for hosting the event. And good morning, everyone. I promised, if I can go backwards there, a 95-year-old man that I would share this encounter that we had with every group that I speak with. About 4 years ago, I was flying in from Arizona to Chicago, where I live. And on the plane next to me was a man who had earned 6 Purple Hearts. How do you earn a Purple Heart? I'm glad you asked. Bravery. He was a 95-year-old World War II veteran. In other words, for 4 hours on this flight, I'm sitting next to the bravest human being I ever met in my life. And at one point he asked me, he said, Mark, what do you do? I said, I'm a social worker. I give speeches. I talk to therapists, counselors, case managers, prevention specialists, people who help others for a living. And this brave soul told me to share with you, or his sentiments. He said, thank you for your service. Thank you so much for your service. Know that I know that the world cannot compensate you enough for the important work that you do. I read a book called Good to Great, and the author says you can tell what's most important to a society by its tallest buildings. You see, 100 years ago, the tallest buildings were churches. Today, the tallest buildings are Fortune 500 companies and Fortune 100 companies. But the author said that no society is great just because you have tall buildings and Fortune 500 companies and Fortune 100 companies. A society is great when you have great nurses and doctors and teachers, and social workers and therapists and prevention specialists and clinical supervisors, people who help others for a living. So if you're in a room anywhere near a mirror, I invite you to look at yourself in the mirror and repeat these words. This is your lucky day. You're looking at greatness. Would you take a moment, if you would, and just claim that? And I begin with a story that I offer you as a gift in honor of the work that you do. And then we'll get into our content. Here's the story. I have a friend named Greg Risberg. Greg Risberg started off as a fourth grade teacher. The backdrop where he taught fourth grade was public housing. He went from being a fourth grade teacher behind public housing to a social worker, then a professional speaker. Greg told me that one day a man called him at midnight and woke him up and asked, "Are you the same Greg Risberg who taught fourth grade right behind public housing 30 years ago?" And Greg said, "Yeah, that's me." He says, "I was a student in your fourth grade class. You were my teacher." He said, "Today I'm a decorated military man. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if I wind up achieving the rank of a colon pile. I was just calling you to tell you that you really made a difference in my life." And Greg said, "What did I do?" He says, "Every Friday you would stop teaching. You would sit the entire fourth grade class in a circle. You would have us to read the newspaper from cover to cover. And what I learned reading the newspaper from cover to cover, that there was more happening in the world than simply what was happening in public housing. So it made me curious about the world. So I heard him graduate high school, join the military. I went around the world twice," he said. "But you did something that was more special than that. One day you invited the entire class on a special field trip, invited the entire fourth grade class to your house. You asked everybody to bring a bag lunch to your house. And I looked in my refrigerator that night and I saw that we had no food. When I made it to your house with no food, you went in your refrigerator and you fixed me a sandwich." He said, "Anyway, the reason I'm calling is because we still have a home in Chicago and I'll be coming home next month. And I wanted to invite you over to my house so I could fix you a sandwich." Your work is like that. You're like farmers who plant seeds, who may not see the fruits of your labor in the season that you plant the seed. Sometimes it takes many seasons to see the fruits of your labor. So I know that you do your work based in faith. Again, thank you very much for all that you do. We want to find out who's with us today. So would you put in chat your occupation? Are you a butcher, a baker, a candlestick maker? Are you a plumber, a doctor? What do you do? That'll help us to tailor these comments to your unique work.
All right, youth, it's going fast, but research assistant, prevention specialist, coalition coordinator, case manager, my eyes, executive director, social worker, drug prevention, opioid epidemiologist.
You know what they all have in common there, Jen, is all of them are with us today and they're all interested in eliminating, ending gun violence. So I hope between myself and the 300 of you that are with us today, that we can say at least one thing that can save one life. One of my colleagues said, if you save one life, it's like you saved all of humanity. So let us get started. All right. So here's our outline. We'll begin with the discussion of drug use as a risk factor for gun violence. Then we'll talk about 21 other risk factors. Now, if you have a pen and a piece of paper, when we talk about these 21 other risk factors, I want you to take notes as to which ones you think are the biggest risk factors as it pertains to gun violence. Because I'll ask you after we look at the 21, which do you think are the biggest risk factors of these 21? Then we'll talk about gun violence prevention and intervention strategies. So the relationship between drug use and violence. The majority of individuals arrested in Cook County, Illinois, were under the influence, especially those connected to gun violence, were under the influence of drugs at the time of arrest. Some of you are wondering, where's Cook County, Illinois? And that includes Chicago and its surrounding suburbs. Chicago and its surrounding suburbs was the home of the most famous Chicagoan ever. No, not Michael Jordan, not Oprah Winfrey, not Barack Obama, Al Capone. You know how I know? I did a presentation in Lithuania, and I asked the group, how many of you ever heard of Michael Jordan? Half of the hands went up. Who's heard of Al Capone? Every hand went up twice, right? So he was involved heavily in gun violence. According to one study, right, out of Cook County, the majority are under the influence. So every year uh, in Chicago, there are 3,000 people that are shot, 500 die. These are street shootings, 500 die. Do the math on that, that's 16%, right? So you're wondering, then why are they not as accurate, right? In other words, if the LAPD or the Chicago police or the New York police shot 3,000 people, we would attend 3,000 funerals. But as it pertains to street violence, 3,000 is shot annually in my town and 500 die. The answer is because they don't do target practice like the police do, number one. Number two, they're under the influence, the majority. And it's hard to be accurate shooting under the influence. Studies out of Johns Hopkins University indicated that 33% of homicides, the perpetrators were under the influence of alcohol or other drugs. And 30% of the victims of homicide were under the influence, especially if these homicides are occurring in public places where there's drinking allowed, like bars. As a matter of fact, some states have passed a law that prohibits the use of firearms in bars as a prevention strategy. Something to think about. Gun violence in urban and rural areas. Gun violence in urban areas has been declining in the past several decades. Let's go back to the year 1986. Were some of you not even alive in 1986? Let's see the hands of everybody that wasn't even born in 1986. 86 was the year that crack cocaine replaced marijuana as the number one street drug. And if you remember, in cities like Compton, California, right, Harlem, and New York, right, there was lots of murders, right, in order to control the drug trafficking in the big cities, right. In fact, in my town, in 1990, there were 2,000. Last year, 500. Those numbers in big cities are declining. But in rural America, they remain constant. That being men who are often under the influence of alcohol or other drugs, committing suicide using their own gun when jobs go away. Driving under the influence. Research says that if a person receives 2 or more DUIs, right, convictions, right, there's an increased risk of being involved in gun violence, right? 2 or more DUIs increase the risk that they'll be involved in gun violence, including intimate partner violence. Father Martin, the first priest who ever got sober in Alcoholics Anonymous, says I over E except after A. Intellect, right, over emotion, except after the alcohol. With the alcohol in the system for some people, the intellect goes out the window, the emotions take over, they have a gun. As a matter of fact, we'll talk policy a little later. Some states have passed laws that say if you have 2 DUIs, you lose your freedom to carry a gun until you get the treatment necessary to prevent the DUI. The two are connected. So let's look at these 21 additional risk factors besides alcohol and other drugs. And as we look at them again, take note. Which do you think are the bigger risk factors? In fact, we want you to think about the 5 biggest from this list. I have these in no certain order. All right, so one risk factor for gun violence is male depression. Let me ask you a question. We can chat. Is depression diagnosed more in boys or girls? This is your straw poll. You see an answer there, Jen?
I'm seeing mostly girls.
They would be absolutely correct. Is depression diagnosed more in women or men? What do you see there, Jen?
Women.
You hit the nail on the head. Exactly. But Terrence Real, author of the book I Don't Want to Talk About, specializes in addressing what he calls male violence. You will never find this in the DSM-5. And there are some unique features. And he makes some really bold statements in this book. One statement he makes is based upon how we raise male children in America. He thinks it's close to impossible for an adolescent male to make it through his adolescent years without being depressed. The reason clinicians miss it is because depression amongst adolescent males often doesn't look like depression as we classically think of depression. It wears these masks, these disguises, which we'll talk about in a moment. He also talked about the link between depression amongst men and heavy substance use. The three unique features include the lack of capacity to feel. Let us chat. Who cries more, newborn boys or newborn girls? Which newborns cry the most, boys or girls? You can put your response in chat. Who cries more?
Seeing a lot of both, same, boys.
And you know what the research is? Studies say they either cry about the same or boys cry slightly more. But by the time they become teenagers, sometimes something happens to a boy's tears. So one unique feature of male depression is the lack of capacity to feel. We live in a world that often robs boys of a feeling vocabulary. Stop crying. Big boys don't cry. And we tend to comfort boys less, according to research, when they do cry. My good friend Eddie, when Eddie was 13 years old, his father died. And he went to the funeral and Eddie was crying. Eddie was 13 years old, he was crying. And the men said, Eddie, big boys don't cry. But Eddie noticed the men weren't crying, but they were drinking alcohol. Our friend Eddie died of cirrhosis of the liver, drinking alcohol in order to deal with his feelings. He died at 39 years old. Keep those tears inside. Man up. He's only 7 years old. He needs to man up. Research says, believe it or not, that parents hug their sons for less period duration than they hug their daughters. Put him down, you'll spoil him. You ever heard that before? Put him down, you'll spoil him. I read it. By the time a boy is 12 years old, the most intensive touch he receives, long-term touch, at the age 12, is when he goes to the barber shop and the barber is cutting the boy's hair and the barber's elbow, shoulder, touches the boy's shoulder. Put him down, you'll spoil him. So what's the message? Keep it all inside. Then he goes to school. If he cries, he's labeled a crybaby. So often school picks up right there where the family leaves off. He has to keep it all inside. The second unique feature, according to Dr. Real, of male depression is externalization of their pain. So because I'm not allowed to express it, and I have a right, if I'm angry, to take that anger out on you, right? And that can include physical violence, including gun violence. The third feature of male depression is feelings of inadequacy without hope. Years ago, President of the United States passed a law called No Child Left Behind. Trust me, as long as there's coffee, there'll be boys left behind. There'll be coffee for a long time, right? 75% of those are in special ed, are males. Feelings of inadequacy, even going to school without hope, and yet without a feeling vocabulary to express it. In the book, Terrence Real talks about one of the leading causes of male depression, which I'll share with you in the form of a story, about a boy who played Park District football. He was the fifth string running back on the football team. Question: what are the chances you're ever going to get in a football game as a fifth string running back? Let me answer my own question. If you're a fifth string running back on a football team, you would have an easier time finding a penny in a Sahara desert than ever getting in a football game. If you're a fifth string running back on a football team, You'd be more likely to be struck by lightning 5 times in the same day and live. Your whole job as a fifth-string running back on the football team is to watch grass grow on the football field. The boy's father died, and they held a funeral on a Friday. And he walked in the locker room the following Saturday morning. Said, "Coach, I want to play the whole game." And the coach did what you'd have done, let him play the whole game. His father died. The boy scored 5 touchdowns. The great Walter Payton never scored 5 touchdowns in a football game. And coach said, "What got into you? You're a fifth-string running back." He said, "Coach, when my dad was alive, he was legally blind. So I figured that since he died and went to heaven, he could see me. I wanted him to be proud of me." That's real sad. That one of the leading causes of male depression, right, is the loss, the absence of the father-son relationship. As we speak, 69% of African American youth, nearly 50% of Latino Hispanic youth, 50% of white youth in America are raised without their father in the home. Sometimes the relationship continues, sometimes it doesn't. Kubler-Ross has taught us that the second stage in grief is anger. The book, The Gifted Child, the author said, it's not the trauma, it's not the loss. It's the lack of opportunity to talk about the pain. So the pain shows up as a mask. According to Terrence Real, the first mask of male depression is anger. By show of hands, how many of you have ever seen a teenage male who walks around looking angry all the time? If you've ever seen a young male who looks angry all the time, would you raise your hand? Terrence Real said that in many instances can be a mask of male depression. The second mask of male depression is rage. Rage is what occurs when the boy has been cheated out of a feeling vocabulary. His anger builds up and it turns into rage. Terrence Real said often the third mask of male depression is violence. The violence is caused by the buildup of the anger and rage. He winds up getting arrested. He goes to juvenile detention. He meets with a psychologist at the juvenile detention center. He receives the diagnosis of conduct disorder. As you know, a prerequisite for antisocial personality disorder later is a diagnosis of conduct disorder as a juvenile. But Terrence Real said he might be depressed, thus misdiagnosed. The fourth mask of male depression, according to Terrence Real, is having substance use to numb the pain of the anger and rage. By the way, most of the young men I work with in Chicago who were deserted by their fathers, who are filled with anger and rage, right, or other losses that they don't get a chance to talk about it, they start medicating that with marijuana. I'll just stay numb all the time. That's how I'll deal with that loss. Destructive peer group affiliation. I join a gang or a hate group. That's how I'll deal with my anger and rage. And then the sixth mask of male depression, according to Terrence Real, is suicide that looks like a homicide. So let me paint a picture. The young boy, when he was 13 years old, he was filled with anger and rage. So nobody thought he was depressed. He's 25 years old, and now he looks classically depressed. The lack of energy, right? Sadness, right? Melancholy. What that means is that the anger is no longer strong enough to mask the depression. Now he looks classically depressed. He wants to commit suicide, but he knows if he commits suicide, his child can't collect on the life insurance policy, or he can't die a hero as if someone killed him. So he sets himself up to get killed in a shootout with the police, or he might do what my nephew did. My nephew knew his father all of 30 seconds. So I was like a father to him, but we didn't spend much time. We were in different locations, right? So he joined the gang. He was angry all the time. At 22, he looked classically depressed. So he put on the hat of a rival gang and went into the other territory and sat there hoping someone would take his life. If that would have happened, the coroners would have showed up, said, "Oh, that's a homicide." But actually, it's suicide that's disguised as a homicide. That's one risk factor. Another risk factor is a killed spirit. So James Garbarino, who wrote the book Lost Boy, went into juvenile detention centers all over the country and they interviewed boys who had murdered. They found that many of them looked like zombies, like they were there, but like they were detached from their spirit, right? You ever seen a young person that looks like zombie, almost like they're detached from their spirit? Just yes or no, if you've ever seen that before. It's like they're there, but they're not really there. I'm curious if you've ever seen that look. He called it a zombie type look. I'm curious, what are you seeing there, Jen? We are seeing some thumbs go up. He called that a kill spirit. James Garbarino said, there are four things that can kill a child's spirit. Abuse, you should go with me in prisons. When I meet with the incarcerated men and they roll up their sleeves and ask them to tell me stories about the scars on their arms. It's unbelievable, right? Abuse can kill the human spirit. A lack of love, love is a verb, rejection, and when their stability is constantly threatened. Not so much poverty, because, my friends, there are some households that are economically poor and are stable. There are some communities out there that are economically poor and stable. What we mean, if we're talking about a kid that grows up in a household where they have food one day, tomorrow they have no food. They have lights at home one day, the next day there are no lights. They have a place to sleep today, tomorrow they come home, they're evicted, right? They're frequently moving constantly, right? Having your stability constantly threatened, according to Dr. James Garbarino, is a risk factor for violence. And what he discovered is once your spirit has been killed and you're detached from your own feelings in your own body, it's easier to detach from the humanity of someone you're thinking about shooting with a gun. You detach from your own spirit, thus it's easier to detach from others who you may be thinking about committing gun violence towards. Another risk factor is father-son pain. Garbarino talked about the absence of a caring father and the presence of an abusive father. Do y'all know Howard Stern? Some people think that Howard Stern is the best DJ in all of radio. Sure, he talks about sex constantly, lewd and lascivious, people have accused him of being, but he's on the radio 4 hours a day with no music. Howard Stern was inducted in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame without ever playing one song. And he was interviewed by David Letterman. David Letterman said, I heard you have daddy issues. Howard Stern said, I have daddy issues. Here's the story that he shared. When he was a little boy, there was nothing he wanted more than to get his father's attention. His daddy would come home from work and sit in his favorite chair, and a young Howard Stern was sitting next to his father trying to get his father's attention. But his father wouldn't pay attention to him. He'd sit straight ahead, listening to the radio, sitting in his favorite chair. Father would listen to the radio while the son was trying to get his attention. As a boy, Howard Stern said to himself, if I could just get inside of that radio, I'd have my father's attention. And if I was really good while I was on the radio, I'd really have his attention. And he was really good on the radio. That story is not common amongst lots of young men who I've worked with in this lifetime. I used to work with young boys, teenagers of 5 to 10 years old, who didn't have contact with their father. Mrs. Sanders, can you find my father? Please find him, please. Age 11, have you found him yet? Please find him, please. Age 12, I think about my father all the time. Age 13, I never think about him. Age 14, I wished he were dead. You see what happened? That yearning, an idealistic enthusiasm turned into rage, right? And sometimes when that rage shows up, the world has to pay. The presence of abusive father, according to James Garbarino, teaches his son that if someone harms you, you have the right to take matters in your own hands. You know, one of the lessons that fathers and older men in villages historically taught boys. We're talking about young men right now because men in America commit most of the gun violence. The purpose of older men in villages is to teach younger men how to regulate their emotions, less physically and more rationally as they age. Abusive fathers teach sons, take matters in your own hands. Parental rejection. Dan Garbarino researched around the world, and what he found in Germany, the young men who are most vulnerable to joining the young Nazis party, young Nazis, come from the rejected class. In the United States, those most susceptible to joining a hate group or a street gang are from the rejected class. You see, your family may reject you, right? But the hate group is always there. The gang is always there. You know that some young men that do shootings at their school have been bullied and rejected. They go online, and Hitler's ideology is always there. You know, the shootings in Columbine happened on Hitler's birthday. I believe that when Timothy McVeigh did the bombings in Oklahoma City, it was on Hitler's birthday. Abandonment as a risk factor. You feel unloved. You don't feel like you belong. Invisibility in big cities and small towns. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said that riots is the language of the voiceless and the invisible. That riots are the language of the voiceless and the invisible. They had riots all over the United States in the 1960s, including in a city called Watts in California. And there was a group known as the Whispers who created a song based upon the race riots they had in Watts in the 1960s. And in that song, they describe how a riot occurs more eloquently than any scholar. The song is called I've Got to Do Wrong. Here are the lyrics. I'm not going to sing them because I can't sing. Nobody saw me walking, and nobody heard me talking. Seems like I've got to do wrong, I've got to do wrong, I've got to do wrong before they notice me. I was walking and nobody saw me walking. I was talking and nobody saw me talking. But when I do wrong, they notice me. When I burn down my neighborhood, they notice me. The rapper Tupac Shakur talked about the youth and gun violence. He said, unless they're shooting, no one's noticing the youth. It's just me against the world. Invisibility. And we've learned. The members of the white community in rural America who are part of hate groups often feel invisible, like they're hidden in society. And so they pick up a torch or a gun. Now you notice me. You know, I do more work in small towns than I do big cities. There's so much invisibility. I found that when I stay often in rural America, the local news, it's not at that town. The news shows the news from the next big city. Invisibility is a risk factor for gun violence. Feeling like the society let you down, which contributes to rage. Dr. Kenneth Hardy talks about 3 levels of rage. And a person feels like my family let me down. Remember a time when aunts and uncles would spend a lot of time with their nieces and nephews? Feeling like my family let me down. My community let me down. I sometimes travel through communities where adults don't speak to teenagers anymore. Incidentally, my mission in my community is to speak to teenagers. My wife told me, because you speak to all the teenagers, I feel safe in the neighborhood. Because you speak to them. A larger community let me down. Nothing but negative images about myself. In rural America, sometimes people feel like the larger community let me down, shipping all of the jobs abroad, paying low wages, discrimination. James Garbarino talked about mixed messages, right? So if you look at television, primary message that's sent is that if you're white and male, you are affluent. There are lots of white males in rural America who are economically poor. So on the one hand, television says I'm wealthy, but I'm poor. Garbarino said that mixed message can contribute to rage and gun violence. Dehumanization, ignored losses equals rage, according to Dr. Kenneth Hardy, and the potential for heavy substance use and violence. So many, many men of color have dehumanizing experiences and ignored losses. And what do we mean by dehumanizing experiences? Police stops, stop and frisk, police brutality, right? Do you remember the facial expression of the officer who killed George Floyd with his knee on his neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds? Do you remember his facial expression? It was like he wasn't killing a person. Dehumanizing experiences, arrest, followed by shopping, poor customer service, no customer service, being left to die by paramedics. You might remember about a year ago, hearing about an African-American male, right, who was beaten by the police in Memphis, Tennessee. The paramedics showed up and didn't do their job. They just let him die. I saw a mural the other day in Chicago. A young Latino Hispanic male named Adam Toledo, who was 13 years old. He looked 11 years old. The police told him to put his hands up. He put his hands up. He shot him in the back like he wasn't a person. Community humiliation. I had a client who actually left a street gang. He left the gang. And when he left the gang, his girlfriend left him and dated a rival gang member. My client felt humiliated, right? Or how about this? A rival gang takes his chain off of his neck, right? They have their cell phone, they take his bike, and then they post it on Instagram or Facebook. He feels humiliated. According to Dr. Kenneth Hardy, for many of these young men, they're humiliated enough and dehumanized enough that dehumanization can be akin to death. You humiliated me. I have a right to take your life. By the way, metropolitan America in the 1990s, when crack outdistanced marijuana as the #1 street drug, the most common killing, African-American men to African-American men, et cetera, Latino Hispanic males, killing other Latino Hispanic males, was controlling drug sales. Today, according to Kenneth Hardy, often it occurs because you humiliated me. You have to pay, even with your life. Ignored losses. Death of a close relative. Client told me the only man that treated me like he loved me was my grandfather. And he died. I went to the funeral. And the adults were consoling each other. And no one was consoling me. I talked to young men, young women, that have 3 friends who were murdered. And nobody processed that with them. Or they suffer from father hunger. Father hunger occurs when the boy didn't get enough fathering. Or they suffer from what I suffered from, mother hunger. Me and my siblings didn't get enough mothering because our mother didn't get enough father. Me and my siblings didn't get enough mothering because our mother didn't get enough father. He was so intoxicated that he was numb all the time to her father. And Dr. Brene Brown says you can't selectively numb. So he was also numb to what his daughter needed. So our mother neglected us and took care of the men in her life, right? And it was ignored. She's alive. So what are you crying about? For what it's worth, I've done lots of work with dreamers. They're more likely to join a gang after a parent has been deported. Or more likely to start using substances heavy after a parent has been deported. Parental divorce. Sometimes in divorce, as you know, the kids feel like the parent divorced them as well. but it never gets processed. Frequent relocations, losing friends constantly. So the impact of dehumanization and ignored losses. According to Dr. Hardy, it can lead to rage. And we talked about the relationship between rage and violence, right? And the potential for heavy substance use. You shoot someone, they don't die, you miss. You shoot an innocent child because you're under the influence when you pull the trigger. The absence of rites of passage as a risk factor for violence in America, including gun violence. So, by definition, a rite of passage is a culturally prescribed ritual for transitioning boys into men and girls into women. There was a time when those rituals were clear. Visualize a boy sleeping in a hut 150 years ago, anywhere in the world, from Ireland to Africa. He's sleeping in a hut next to his mother. At age 13, he's awakened by men in the village. And they take him into the wilderness. They give him a spear. He learns bravery, how to hunt, and how to bring home the bacon. After he goes through this rite of passage, he returns to the village, and they have a celebration. As being a man. Visualize 150 years ago. A girl anywhere in the world, in tribal societies. She has her first menstrual cycle. Her mother and other women in the village celebrate her first menstrual cycle. They start teaching her lessons as to how she goes from being a girl to a woman. There's a few of these rites of passage still remaining. In Jewish culture, for the boys, they have what's called the bar mitzvah. And for the girls, the bat mitzvah. And amongst Latino Hispanic culture, they have what's called the quinceañera, the girl. Minus these official rites and passages, let us check. Where you live and where you work. How does a boy know when he's a man? You put your response in check. 2024, where you live and where you work. How does a boy know when he's a man? Responses there, Jen.
When he turns 18, when they say you're 18, when you graduate from high school. Looks like there are some cultural transitions in the native culture that still exist. It's very confusing, some people are saying, and lots of people are saying 18 or graduation, or it just doesn't happen.
So if I don't graduate then, does that then mean I'm not a man, right? If I'm 18, I don't have certain responsibilities. Does that mean I'm a man? Am I not a man? It's not always clear. Know that I know that in some rites of passage have always involved, where males are concerned, demonstrations of courage, right? A hunt for food, a scarification, to kill a lion, right? Today, a rite might be to shoot someone for an older gang leader or a hate group leader, right? To carry a weapon, to get arrested and face that without appearing to be afraid, right? Where you have the absence of positive rights, culturally prescribed, you might have those negative rights, which can involve, in some instances, violence. I'm going to demonstrate I'm brave by using a gun on someone. Suggest that you and I have some work to do. Say more about that in a little while. I'm talking about risk factors. I want you to think about what you think are the top 5 from this list of 21. Another risk factor, according to anthropologist Robert Moore, is limited role models on what it means to be a whole man. He puts quotation marks around whole. Robert Moore traveled the world and asked people to tell stories about men. All over the world, people tell stories about 4 types of men: the king, warrior, lover, magician. So I want you to pay attention to these archetypes: king, warrior, lover, magician. In fact, you might write down king, warrior, lover, magician, and I'm going to ask you some questions in a moment. We'll have a short quiz. So Robert Moore wrote a book called King, Warrior, Lover, Magician. These 4 types of men. The king is the noble leader. the man who blesses others. He sacrifices what he needs for the good of the group. If you think about these men that you see on the screen, Gandhi, Churchill, Mandela, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., they were kings in that they were willing to die for the people. They were willing to sacrifice themselves in their own life for the people, the king, the one who blesses others. So I started testing my son after I read this book to find out if he was a king. When he was a little boy growing up, his favorite food was chicken nuggets. And my wife would bake him chicken nuggets. So when my son was 7 years old, I said, son, if you had two chicken nuggets and I was hungry and you were hungry and your mom was hungry, who would eat? He said, Daddy, I would eat both of those chicken nuggets and you and mommy would watch. I asked him that question when he was 9 years old. I said, son, if there were two chicken nuggets and I was hungry and you were hungry and your mother was hungry, who would eat? He said, Dad, I think I'd give mom one and I'd eat one and you'd watch. Ask him when he was 10 years old. Two chicken nuggets. If I was hungry, you were hungry, your mom was hungry, who would eat? He said, I think I might give them to you and mom and maybe I would watch. Remind me to tell you what he said when he was 14 years old. If I forget, remind me. The king. And all over the world, Robert Moore said people told stories about the warrior, the hunter, the protector, the one who demonstrated courage. Mark Twain defined courage as not the absence of fear, but the ability to experience the fear and act anyway. See, if you're afraid, and no one defined courage that way, you have to carry a weapon in order to feel safe. And all over the world, people told stories about the lover. The lover should never be confused with the sexual. The lover is a man who can be emotional, who can cry, who can hold a hand, who can be intimate, vulnerable, the relationship builder, the lover. And all over the world, people told stories about the magician, the great negotiator, the creative problem solver, the man who could pull a rabbit out of a hat. So there was a famine in the village, and the warrior couldn't bring home any food. The magician might negotiate with a rival tribe to bring home the food. The magician. So here's your quiz. So we got the king, the warrior, the lover, the magician. So I want you to pretend that you're a 19-year-old male and you're walking down the street and you're holding your girlfriend's hand. Which of those four archetypes is leading you that moment when you're holding your girlfriend? You all are holding hands. Which one? Is that the king, the warrior, the lover, the magician? Which one? King, warrior, lover, magician. You see there, Jen?
I think most are saying warrior, some are saying magician, lots of saying king.
And I would say the lover. He doesn't care what his friends think. They're laughing because he holds her hand. He likes her. He's willing to be, let's go there, vulnerable. I don't care what my friends think. Let's go back intimate, right? And out of nowhere, a lion and a tiger and a bear escape from the zoo, and they're charging towards them. Which one takes over at that point? The lion, the bear, and the tiger are charging past them.
Everyone's saying warrior, warrior, warrior.
You're right. But I asked one of my young clients, 19 years old, he said, the magician, I run. I said, what about your girlfriend? I bring her with me. We run together. Right? The magician, creative problem solver. Right. He makes it to his girlfriend's home. And her little brother is crying because he was cut from the basketball team. Which one takes over? Which archetype takes over at that moment? He's crying because he was cut from the basketball team.
Lover, magician, king, lover.
And I would say
king,
several of them.
warrior.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. I'd say several of them. The lover, he might get down on one knee and console him. Say, man, I know you love basketball. It's okay to cry. Men cry, man. It's okay to cry. The lover, right? It's okay. because I know how much you love basketball. And then the magician might kick in, the creative problem solver. Said, have you ever thought about being the manager of the team? That will put you close to the team. You would learn the plays. Maybe one day you might wait the team. As a matter of fact, he might tell them the story of Scottie Pippen, a Hall of Fame basketball player that played with Michael Jordan, who was cut from his college team as a freshman. Scottie was about 5'9". He was cut from the team. And Scottie became the manager of the team. And one day, several players would say, get in there, Scottie Pippen, you know the plays. And he grew to 6'7". The rest is history. By the way, I've ran this model in this book past lots of women, feminist groups. And they told me there's a king, a warrior, a lover, a magician in every woman. And I believe that. I believe it. And according to Robert Moore, each of these archetypes have a shadow, a less mature version of the real archetype. The shadow of the king is the corrupt leader, the dictator, right? They have power, but it's corrupt. It's immature. They overuse their power. They're not trying to bless the community. The shadow warrior is the bully, the gang member, the rageaholic, the guy that picks up a gun and shoots someone, has a quick temper, violence problem. You see, according to Robert Moore, we all need people in our life who model all four of these. The shadow lover, the serial affair guy, who hurts a lot of people through sexual conquest without consideration of their feelings, right? The shadow magician, the con artist, the manipulator. So every young man that I work with, I've talked with them about this book. To know that you have choices. You don't have to just pick up a gun as a shadow warrior. You can ask yourself questions like, what would a king do in this situation? Or a lover? Or a magician? There are options. We're talking about risk factors. Difficulty expressing feelings, educational frustration. If you live in rural America and you drop out of high school, research says you decrease your life expectancy by a decade. If you live in a metropolitan area, you drop out of high school, you're at an increased risk of spending time in jail or prison. Gang or hate group affiliation, lack of future orientation, where you can't visualize a bright future. I traveled over the country the last couple decades and asked African American, Latino, Hispanic males, how long do most Latino, Hispanic, and African American men live? I asked them this question. What do you think is the most common response I receive to the question, how long do most African American and Latino, Hispanic men live? What's the most common answer? Curious what you think.
I think 25, 35, 25, 21, 40, 20, 40.
Thank you so much, Jen. The most common answer I get is age 21. My epiphany is the 19-year-olds are saying, I've got 2 more years to live. 18 years old are saying maybe 3 more years to live. If I don't think I'll be alive long, why would I stop getting high? Why would I ever leave a gang? Why would I finish school? I'm going to be dead anyway. One of my first orders of business in every city is to show these young men the real numbers. In Chicago, for instance, the life expectancy of African American men is not 21, it's 70. Latino Hispanic males, 73. I was working with a young man, I showed him the truth, because he thought he had to be dead by 21. I showed him at the age of 70. He snatched that piece of paper from my hand and says, man, I can live. I don't have to die next week. I said, looks like it according to statistics. He said, man, I got to go smoke some marijuana to think about that. I never thought about the possibility. We'll say more about that in a little while. A history of trauma as a risk factor. Discrimination, economic recession, excitement about guns, You might have heard that song by Jay-Z and Beyonce before they were married. It's called the OG Bonnie and Clyde, where he talks about me and my girlfriend. She talks about me and my boyfriend. They're talking about each other. The original song, Me and My Girlfriend, sung by rapper Tupac Shakur. He meant his gun that he slept with under his pillow. James Garbarino interviewed young men in detention centers from metropolitan big cities in rural America, and he found that some were really excited being around guns. That was one of the risk factors. The history of incarceration. Some young men go to juvenile detention centers and they don't have PTSD when they go. They leave with PTSD. Heavy substance use, retaliation, dropping out of school. So let us check. Of these 21 risk factors, when do you think, which ones do you think are the biggest risk factors for gun violence? If we could figure out the biggest ones, we might be able to identify strategies around those risk factors.
I'm seeing ACE score, substance use, lack of stability, trauma, substance use, trauma and substance use, depression and substance use.
All right, so we're going to talk about what we can do about this. All right, gun violence among adolescent girls and women. Girls involved in gangs are rarely perpetrators of gun violence. They're more likely to buy and stash guns from male gang members. 6,000 American women die each year from gun violence. Half of those are suicide. And 80% of homicide victims, victims of partner violence, are women. Of course, the research says that women who experience intimate partner violence, and those of you who work with women around domestic violence know that they are at the greatest, the peak of being victims of a homicide from their partner the first 2 years after they leave the relationship. There was a time when we want to help put measures in place to keep her alive. It's the first 2 years after she leaves the relationship. Women, when women believe they cannot stop the violence and previous efforts to escape were unsuccessful, some will commit suicide against their partner who perpetrated against them. She tried to leave 5 times. He found her. She changed her cell phone number twice. He found the new number. No matter what I do to try to escape, I can't end this. I have no choice but to take his life. Interestingly enough, Dr. Leonora Walker said that particular defense is the one defense that is sometimes held up in court. Women in the United States who are pregnant or have recently given birth are more likely to die of intimate partner violence connected to a gun than some other medical causes, right? The most famous case I know of is football player Ray Caruth, whose girlfriend was pregnant. He shot and killed his girlfriend, and the baby lived. Has permanent brain damage. The baby's now in his 20s, young adult. Let's talk about prevention and intervention strategies. First off, let me just ask you a yes or no question. Is this making sense so far? Are you getting anything out of this so far? Just out of curiosity, I can't see you. I just want to know, are you getting anything out of it so far?
I'm
You want
seeing
to know at
lots of
least 2 people are getting something out of what we're talking about.
lots of
We got at least
yeses.
2. All right, then. We got at least 2. Let us continue. All right. So one good relationship, right? Garbarino found these young men who are in detention centers for murder, right? Who look like zombies, right? What's required is one good relationship. Someone who loves them unconditionally, who breathes life into them. See, I come from the neglect, but I always had my grandmother. She loved me more than everyone else, right? One good relationship with a relative, a friend, a teacher. One good relationship helps. Future orientation and a purpose that's larger than their current circumstance. See, young people can't see beyond today. They pick up a gun and turn it on themselves or they turn it on someone else, right? I invite you to do with me what I call a visualization. And there are three ways you can do this visualization. Your eyes open, your eyes closed, or you can write. Eyes open, eyes closed, and you can write. This visualization is called an ideal day. It's 10 years from today. If you're driving right now, keep your eyes open. And that which I'd like you to visualize is in the ideal 10 years from today. On this ideal day, I'd like to ask you to visualize yourself waking up in the morning. Do you see yourself as waking up in the morning? And in the space where you wake up, there's a mirror. Take a look at yourself in the mirror. How do you look? Does anyone wake up with you? Take a look at that.
Oh,
The space where you wake up is ideal. You've always wanted to wake up in an environment that looks like this. Look at the space where you wake up. It's ideal for you as well. If you're indoors, take a look outside. This is your ideal weather. When you feel that weather, you know it's going to be a great day. Feel the weather. On this ideal day, what's the first thing you do? You can do anything you want on this day. What do you do? First thing. And what do you do next on your day? And then what do you do? On this ideal day, you sit down for a few moments and you reflect on your life purpose. 10 years from today, you are living your life purpose. What is your life purpose? Take a look at that. You spend a few moments reflecting on the legacy that you're leaving the world. You're leaving quite the legacy. What is your legacy? The physical ailments that you have are gone for a whole day. No back pain, no knee pain. Feel how it feels not to be in pain for a day physically. You have improved your finances a decade from today. Look at your finances in a decade. On this ideal day, you stop for lunch. This is your favorite meal for lunch. What's on the menu? Who prepares lunch? Who, if anyone, joins you for lunch? Take a look at lunch on this ideal day. You have lots of leisure time on your hands following lunch. What do you do with that leisure time? This is going to be a good day. What do you do with that time after lunch? It's time for dinner. This is your favorite meal for dinner. What's on the menu? Who prepares it? Who, if anyone, joins you for dinner on this ideal day? You have more leisure time on your hands following dinner. What do you do with that time? You're going to do something enjoyable. On this ideal day, what time do you go to bed? And what do you dream about? If your eyes are closed, we invite you to open your eyes. So I work with young men who the University of Chicago's algorithms have demonstrated are at the greatest risk of shooting someone with a gun. And I work with them in groups. And part of that work is to help them to have a vision for a positive future. Why is it significant? Because if they're 19 years old and they expect to be dead at age 21, and they just did a visualization that takes them to age 30. If that makes sense. So we put them together in twos, these young men. We've done it with young women as well, right? We put them together in twos. The first thing we notice is talk about their ideal day. Their voices get elevated. Some of them have permanent smiles on their faces. Some of them, as they talk about their ideal day, their eyes look so big, look like they just smoked crack cocaine. There's a book that's called Optimism, Biology of Hope. The author's research indicates that when someone is optimistic and hopeful about their future, neurochemicals are released in their brain. Some of the same chemicals that are released in a person's brain when they use drugs like cocaine are released when they're optimistic about their future. So that's a part of the curriculum. I'll share more with you later. Mentorship and a membership. Big brothers, big sisters work. They have waiting lists. So we need to develop our own mentorship programs, especially for young people at the greatest risk for violence. Big brothers, big sisters research indicates that young people who work with a mentor, right, have less violence than those who sit on a waiting list waiting for a mentor, right? And a membership. Incredible story about this boy named Mike who played Little League Baseball on a team known as the Cougars. And Mike came down with cancer. He had to have radiation therapy, chemotherapy for cancer. He lost his hair. And Mike was too embarrassed to go to the next Cougars baseball game. Because at the beginning of each game, the team would line up along the third base line, take off their hats and place them over their heart and sing the national anthem. He was afraid that all of his Cougar teammates would laugh at him when they saw that he had no hair. His father talked him into going to the next Cougars baseball game. And sure enough, the team lined up along the third base line. And right before Mike took off his hat, all 25 of his Cougar teammates took off their hats first. They saw that they all shaved off their hair. He looked at him and they said, once a Cougar, always a Cougar. We need connections to feel that we belong. Earlier, we talked about a risk factor being rejection and abandonment. And when we can connect young people to a mentor who are at risk and a membership to the YMCA, the YWCA, the Boys Club, the Girls Club, for what it's worth. I once heard a juvenile judge in Washington, D.C. said, in 25 years of being a judge, he'd never had a young man come before him and committed a crime who had been a member of the Boy Scouts of America for at least 5 years. Something to think about. Rites of passages. So when we came back from Ghana, West Africa, we started doing rites of passage groups with young men and young women at the greatest risk of violence. We work with them together in groups. First thing we would do would have them to come up with a group name, a group logo, a group mission statement to bond them with each other. After all, every gang has a logo, a name, and a mission statement. Now, rite of passage involves, historically, going into the wilderness and coming back, going forth and coming back. So we'd give them a task, assignments, like researching the history of their own name and doing a family tree, obtaining a social security card, a voter registration card, and a state ID. Most of them were gang affiliated. So we'd ask them to do a community project, something to uplift and beautify the community. Then we would take them into the wilderness, from Chicago into the wilderness. We'd spend weekends on retreat. They'd do personal growth work. They would address those issues that have them filled with anger and rage, and those issues that make them want to use a gun on someone else. By the way, we on these weekend retreats, we did gestalt therapy, empty chair work, right? Experiential therapy, right? What do you think they most focus on these weekend retreats? What had them filled with anger and rage? Unfinished business. You can put your response in chat. I'm curious what you think. All of us who led these rites of passage groups had ourselves gone to rites of passage groups. The men would lead these groups with men. The women would lead these rites of passage groups with the young women. What would be the primary focus?
We're seeing lots of family issues, anger, loss of parents, hollering at the chair,
Yeah,
fear.
so yelling at the chair would be part of the therapy, let's say. But when we were in Ghana, West Africa, me and 7 African American social workers went together. We learned about rites of passages. We lost them when we were brought over to the Americas. So we went to Ghana, to Africa, to find out what rites of passages were like. And what the chiefs told us in villages is that human beings are made up of 4 spiritual components: the spirit of God, the spirit of our fathers, the spirit of our mothers, and the spirit of our ancestors. I'll just talk about the 4th one. Have you ever gone to a Black Baptist church, an African American Baptist church? Lots of singing and dancing and shouting. When we were in West Africa, it was the same singing, dancing, and shouting. They said because we have we have the same spirit, right? And what they taught us is that rage occurs if you have tension in any one of those 4 spiritual domains. If you're angry with God, rage towards your father, your mother, you don't like your ancestral background. And so the experiential therapy would be where the pain was. Many of them had anger towards their father or their mother. Those were the 2 common sources. And so, I'm angry with my father, we get a punching bag, let him hit it, right? Get some of the anger and rage out. A lot of journal writing. You ever think about the fact that rap music is biographical journaling? It's like keeping a diary. By the way, most successful rappers suffer from father hunger, like Jay-Z. Father left the family and started using heroin. Jay-Z had work to do. He picked up a pen. Advocacy around gun laws. Every time there's a school shooting, we cry for a few weeks. We don't do anything. We don't take action. We cry. Well, I looked at some studies that say that regardless of political party or whether you're political or not, most people in America want some gun laws. Politicians don't. And people who sell the weapons don't. So here's my hunch, that we're going to have to do what we did in the substance use disorders treatment arena. In addictions, we have an advocacy movement. And there are people who say that we're in recovery and we vote. And they're holding town hall meetings with politicians to see what's your stance on recovery and treatment. We're going to vote accordingly. Something's going to happen because there are more and more communities that are getting mobilized to address this. Jobs. You see, the Crips and the Bloods in LA are only about 60 years old. The real story in LA. Does anyone know what California was called before it was called California? Mexico. Listen to the names of the city: Los Angeles, San Bernardino, San Diego, San Francisco. Did you know there are 11 states in the United States that were either Mexico or part Mexico, and we took it? So there have been Mexican, Latino, Hispanic gang members in the barrio that have had gangs for over 100 years. But a priest by the name of Father Gregory Boyle, right, set up some employment programs called Homeboy and Homegirl Industries. They put gang members to work. And his research reveals, in his book, Tattoos on the Heart, that the greatest deterrent from a bullet is a job. In Wilmington, North Carolina, they will have lots of gang shootings, right? And somebody built a factory and put gang members to work and the shooting stopped. The greatest deterrent from a bullet is a job. Father Gregory Boyle loved to put gang members to work side by side with their rival. Have you noticed we haven't been hearing as much about gun violence in LA as we used to? What he discovered, if you can put them to work side by side with a rival, this is no longer your enemy. This is your coworker. So I was working in a program in Chicago. I wrote the curriculum for Latino and Hispanic males who are at the greatest risk for gun violence. and we put them to work as an employment component. And we've combined the jobs with CBT. We do mindfulness and meditative practices to teach them how to regulate their emotions, right? To know when their body is tense, right? How to go from being dysregulated to regulated. It's a year-long curriculum using CBT exercises, right? Meditation and mindfulness is an important part of it. We present these high-risk situations and help them think through how they will deal with these situations rather than pick up a weapon. In my town, some people are teaching Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s nonviolence training. Think about it. How successful was that? There were 20 million African Americans who were filled with anger and rage, and Dr. King had a program that helped them channel it towards nonviolent means to accomplish outcomes. Community mobilization. Does anyone know the capital city of Liberia, located near Nigeria and Ghana in West Africa? What's the capital city of Liberia? The answer is Monrovia. Here's the story. When President James Monroe, the fifth president of the United States, was president, he allowed a group of Africans who were enslaved in the South and Southern states to go back to Africa. They went to Liberia and they took over the country. Does that surprise you? Because traumatized people traumatize people. And they've been fighting a civil war for 200 years. They went back to Africa and they took over. They named the capital of Liberia Monrovia. Traumatized people. Traumatized people. And they were fighting a civil war for 200 years. In fact, I went to Liberia and I saw something I've never seen in the United States. I saw 10, 11, and 12-year-old boys at the airport with automatic weapons bigger than them. Have you ever seen a 10-year-old boy with a weapon bigger than him? And a social worker did what social workers do. By the way, March is Happy Social Work Month. Happy Social Work Month to all the social workers. And by the way, I've never met a social worker that I didn't like. I like every social worker I ever met. Happy Social Work Month. A social worker in Liberia took matters in her own hands. She mobilized the women in Liberia. And they went on a sex strike and a prayer vigil and a voter registration drive. The women said, as long as you keep killing each other, we won't have sex, right? We'll wear white dresses every day so you will know who's striking, and we're going to mobilize the women to vote. She won a Nobel Prize. There's a social worker. She wrote a book called Mighty Be the Power. Tells the story of how a group of women got together, mobilized by a social worker, and stopped a 200-year gun war in Liberia. She won a Nobel Prize. And because the women were mobilized, they elected the first female president of Liberia. Men are the ones who declare all these wars. It's amazing. Community mobilization. So more prevention strategies. We need more outlets for anger and rage. George Foreman, before he was the one who came up with the lean, mean cookie machine, he was in Job Corps filled with rage, but he learned the box. Muhammad Ali, someone stole his bike. He was ready to fight, talking to a police officer. And the officer said, well, at least let me teach you how to box because you want to fight. And the rest is history. Rampage Jackson, the mixed martial artist. His mother said, if it were not for mixed martial arts, my son would probably take someone's life. Outlets. Helping males develop a feeling vocabulary as a prevention strategy. Therapy to address issues of abandonment and rejection. Addressing dehumanizing experiences and ignored losses. Here's what we do in these groups. With these young men who have dehumanizing experiences. We allow them to openly talk about these experiences. We create rituals to honor what they've lost. If they had 3 buddies murdered, what are their names? And how can we create rituals to honor them? We do experiential exercises in these groups to address rage. For those who develop a substance use disorder, we address that. And by the way, all over this country, former gang members who turned their life around, who broker peace on the street, it works. And you know what they did in Chicago a couple years ago? They marched on the Magnificent Mile. So you're making all this money in Chicago. We want you to put some money into ending gun violence and gang violence. You know how I know a strategy like that can be successful? You know how the FBI really caught up with Al Capone, right? Was that the owner of Sears, Nabisco, and Marshall Fields said he's bad for business. You probably heard about the St. Valentine's Day massacre. Al Capone had the street shot up. And once the business community got involved, the FBI brought down Al Capone. So when the business community funds intervention strategies on the streets, it's not a bad thing at all. Teaching relaxation techniques and mindfulness practices. In LA, they'd have these helicopters that would hover over people's head, making students afraid. So they brought meditation into the schools and they found it was helpful. My friends, let's save a life right now. Take serious all threats of violence in schools. So they have something today, as you know, these drills, these shooter drills, having kids get on the desks, which frightens them, traumatizes them. You know what would be really effective? Because I traveled the country doing presentations on violence prevention. In most of these cases, where a kid is planning to shoot up the school, he tells someone, other students. He might tell us a student, a teacher in an essay, or post it on public media. If we could put it out there as a mantra, right? To talk when you hear this, that kid is in danger personally, and they're going to take it out on other people. If we can get those reported, we can save a lot of lives. They almost always tell someone. And of course, developing consequential and critical thinking skills. So I've worked with young people who are in school suspension because a lot of kids would rather be suspended outside of school, but in school suspension. And we take that as a moment to teach them problem solving skills, situations they face in the real world. What's the problem? Whose problem is it? Your feelings about the situation. What are the options for addressing the problem? You see, when they identify 5 or 6 options, they're going from feeling, which is where anger and rage lies, to thinking. What are the pluses and minuses of each option? Which option is the best? And what will you do? Teaching problem solving skills as a way of addressing the risk of violence. Okay, what I've learned over the years, it's not so much what I teach, but more about the action you take. Let's chat one more time, and I'll turn it over to Jen. I'll have some words before we close. What's the one action you're going to take when this webinar is over as a result of the time that we spent together today? What will you do? One action.
Tell others
Okay.
about what we were taught. Share the ideas presented, listen more, spread the word, take time to listen, share what I've learned, work on mentorship, read more, share with others, notice the signs and be supportive, talk to the boys, help my children look to the future.
Okay, so here's the story. If my barber were alive, he'd be 100 years old. I don't need a barber. Look at how short my hair is. But I go because he's affirmed me since I was a teenager. Over 4 decades, he was my barber. He's a storyteller. I want to share with you the story that he told me the most frequently. He started telling me the story when I was 13 years old. About a minister in a small town. Every day at about 6 p.m., he'd knock on the door of one of the church members. Why 6 p.m.? Because it was dinner time. Because everyone in the town looked up to the minister. Whatever they were eating, they would give the minister the largest portion. Family of 5, they would eat the meatloaf. They'd cut half of the meatloaf for the minister, and they'd eat the other half. If they were eating chicken, they would give the minister the largest pieces, the breast and the thigh, and then they'd eat the wings and the legs. Why did he tell me that story for 4 decades? That story is about you. I think the work that you do with young people, I think it's a ministry. you make the world a better place. So I like to believe if you made a home visit, a family might offer you the breast and the thigh of the chicken, but I also know your heart. You're a giver. You pass on the big pieces. Say, no, give me a wing. Most you would say, nope, I'm only going to eat the vegetables. Again, thank you for all that you do and for who you are. My email address, if you want to contact me, I'm turning it over to Rebecca. Thank you so much. Rebecca, I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
I'm actually going to jump in, Mark, and people want to know, what did your son say about the nuggets when you asked him at age 14?
Oh my goodness. He said, I'll become a magician. I'd get a little knife and I'd cut the 2 pieces up into 14 little pieces, and all 3 of us would eat. I'm a magician, Dad. Me, Mom, and you would eat.
Great. Thank you, Mark, so much. Incredible information, powerfully presented as always, Mark. Thank you so much. I wanted to make sure you all know about some upcoming events that we have planned for you all. One is coming up on March 20th, Prevention Works, and a call to action. I often hear, how can we share and show people that prevention does work? This is your opportunity to find out how we can do it. Be sure to join us for that. Many people have requested much more training on social media. It's coming up for you on March 28th. We have our deep dive into prevention ethics sessions continue the first Thursday through June. This one on April 11th. Not too many folks have signed up yet, and I think because people think it doesn't apply to them. We have, this is looking at increasing resiliency in military connected youth. You don't need to live in a military-based community in terms of near a base or something like that to have military-connected youth within your community. When Kentucky added to their youth survey with a question around whether or not the kids were connected closely to the military in terms of somebody within their close family being in the military, they found that nearly 40% of their youth were military connected. So if you think it doesn't apply to you, you might even just check it out to see whether or not it does. It will be great. I heard this person present at the National Prevention Network Research Conference, and she does a great job. All right, next, if you're interested about using generative AI in your substance misuse prevention work, be sure to join us on April 18th. Brian Kloss from Johns Hopkins is going to present that. He's fantastic. And one more that I wanted to highlight right now is strategies for preventing substance misuse in older adults. If you're interested in learning more about that, that's on April 25th. So there's just a few things coming up. Be sure to check out our website for the rest. We have quite a few others as well that are open for registration. If you haven't followed us already, we'd love to have you follow us on social media, because this is the way we get information out to you constantly. Every day we post about resources and events and information that will be helpful for you in working in the prevention field for substance misuse prevention. So be sure to follow us on LinkedIn and or Facebook. I did post during the session today some more resources for you all regarding this topic, so you can go check that out. And as was mentioned at the beginning, we do have an evaluation form that you will be redirected to at the close of this session. So if you could take a few minutes to let us know how well this met your needs, that would be fantastic. As I mentioned, I read every single comment, so please know it doesn't go into some black hole. I do read every single comment that is done through these evaluation forms. So with that, thank you again. A huge thank you to Mark, and also a huge thank you to Rebecca and Jen, who have been working on the back end for us throughout this session. And a huge thank you to you all for participating in this session today. Mark, Rebecca, Jen, any last words?
Just thank you so much. Thank you, Rebecca and Jen, and thank you to the group for all that they do.
All right. I hope everyone has a great rest of your day. Take care.